All right, welcome everyone. We are back for our final episode. This is episode 6. We're going to be looking at some final thoughts and takeaways. Again, we're talking with Bob Manning, author of In the Midst of a Recall. We have been talking about recall readiness, about proactive approaches, preventative approaches, and reactive approaches to recalls. We've talked about some real world examples. We've talked about airplanes a lot. And we've talked about this in so many different contexts. I want to talk about one more context, that being legacy. When you look at either a corporate's legacy or your own professional legacy, do you want to be remembered for what you could have done or what you didn't do? Or do you want to be remembered for the steps that you did take? That you took every step. You were instrumental in bringing about significant changes and preventing some of these things from happening when we look at the worst case scenarios associated with outbreaks and recalls. And yeah, we cannot predict everything, but if we don't try, we never will. Similarly, we cannot prevent everything,
Mhm.
but if we don't try, we never will. So, Bob, what would be your kind of key messages for different food industry professionals around the idea of recalls?
Yeah, I think, when we look at it, first and foremost is understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it, or why we're doing it and what we're doing. Meaning that we have to understand the magnitude of the products that we put out, who's consuming them, and we are safeguarding people's lives. Or if we're not doing the right things, we're harming people's lives. And I think when you put it into those perspectives, it's not just I'm making bread or I'm making milk or I'm making ice cream. It's understanding that there's a much larger component to this. And so, from a recall perspective or from a understanding what we're doing, it's trying to put into that bucket to say, okay, I'm feeding people, like I'm feeding families and I'm feeding lives and I'm keeping them safe and I'm keeping them healthy. And I think if you put that in the forefront all the time, you'll make the right decisions. Not that you need something like that to make the right decisions, but there are some people out there that do that. And so or need that support. But I think it's important to understand what we're doing in the food manufacturing world, because unfortunately a misstep can lead to catastrophic and irreversible consequences.
You know, such a great thought you had there, such a great thought you share with us. I sometimes think about, and maybe this is my childhood kind of a thing. I think about those Ronald McDonald statues and the Colonel Sanders statues. I
Yeah.
remember the Burger King statues, or there's like statues of chicken for some companies, or the bucket of chicken, or whatever. These kind of the fiberglass shell of a mascot, and there's companies that literally, whether you call it hide or stand behind them as a, that is their logo, that's their brand, that is what conveys trust and
Mhm.
and sometimes nostalgia. I granted
Sure.
that, but you know, if a company makes uh, you know, a promise, if a company has a mission statement that talks about safe food, if a company makes a promise that their food is safe, quite honestly, just the fact that you're putting food out there into the market should be in and of itself a fact that, a promise, if you will, that is safe
Right.
food. If you don't work to be able to prevent a recall, to be ready for a recall, to be proactive when it comes to recalls, and obviously to follow through and be reactive with
Right.
a recall, then it's as if your food safety promises are as hollow as those mascots standing out
Mhm.
there in front of your shop. Um, why does recall readiness, proactivity, preventative approaches, why should these be elevated as being a critical part of a company's mission statement?
That's a great question. And I think, the answer is simple, but if you dig deep enough, it goes far beyond that. I think when you understand the magnitude of a recall, it will drive people to do things in excess of what they may normally do. Meaning that, CEOs will focus on or may talk about food safety. We're going to write a letter and we're going to do these things. But when they understand that the true reality of what is at stake, it may make them look a little bit deeper. So now they're gonna put a little bit more emphasis on food safety and food quality. But I also think the recall readiness recalibrates everybody at whatever frequency you're doing it. So when you have, I talked to this one client and they said, well, I said, how often do you do mock recalls? And they said, once a year. I said, okay. Well, that's probably because their GFSI or regulatory body saying to do it once a year. I used to do it once a month. And I'll be honest with you, I did not like doing them. Just because they are very cumbersome and complex if you do them to the nth degree. But what it does is it recalibrates everybody to say, what if this happens? And it recalibrates everybody because again, no one thinks they're going to have recall. No one does. And but when you put that mock recall in, it now highlights it to a level that, okay, yep, I understand it. Now, one thing that I encourage people to do is when you do your mock recall, and we've talked about this before, when you include everyone, I would have an executive leader on that mock recall. And this is why. Like whether it's and rotate them, right? So one time you're going to have your vice president of quality. One time you're going to have your vice president of operations. One time you're going to have your vice president of legal. Like rotate these people or have them all on. And so more than likely you wouldn't have and probably shouldn't have your CEO, but they'll get briefed on the information. Or maybe you do want to have them. But if you include them, they can hear what's going on, and this will now recalibrate the executive teams to say, okay, well, let's dig into that a little bit more because what level of risk is that going to bring to our organization? And what that should do is that should invigorate a lot of discussion and more support, whatever it is. Maybe it's people support or it's equipment support or whatever it is, right? And so again, that recall readiness, that whole program should recalibrate, reset everybody to say, this is something that could happen. We hope it never does, but let's prepare. And when we do the exercise, let's make it as real world as we can. And that will help drive us to a better spot. And I actually just did a webinar on recall readiness with Food Safety Magazine. And there's some documents out there that you can get, but make it as real as you can make it because if it happens, it's like insurance or like your seatbelt. If it happens, it's just one more layer of protection.
Yeah, I'm going to throw a curve at you, Bob. I spent many years on a submarine. I was a nuclear engineer on a
I
submarine,
saw that. I read
and
that.
uh, we did have weekly drills, almost weekly drills, uh, and we had fire drills, and we had flooding drills, and we had electrical
Mhm.
casualty or whatever kind of drills. And like you said, from the commanding officer down, they were involved in the drills, and we would do these drills because if you can't get through a drill, if you can't, learn something from a drill, when it's, a very controlled environment for a drill,
Sure.
what are you going to do when it's the middle of the night and you're 300, I don't know, a couple hundred feet below the surface of the ocean, and you're in literally a submarine, and you don't have the ability to call for help. You don't have the ability to, put a pause to everything. You've got 150 some odd lives that are, they're kind of dependent on your ability to handle a crisis in your space. And
Mhm.
you couldn't really complain about the drills because I'll tell you, I was in real fires, I was in real flooding, I was in real
Yep.
things, and it's amazing how fast those escalate. And it's amazing
Sure.
how you fly based on, adrenaline and muscle memory and
Yep.
yeah, I mean, we don't want to scare people, but at the same time, if it's been a year or two and 20% of your workforce has been replaced and no one has any idea
Yep.
what a uh, what a recall, what a mock recall would entail or look like, how are they going to know what it looks like or what to do when the real thing is all of a sudden here? And by the way, everyone's looking at you because of
Yeah.
the media and the news and the urgency
Yep.
of the recall here.
Well, I think, that hits something like that strikes a chord, which is phenomenal. Like when you started doing these, going back to your submarine days, those probably when you were fresh into the submarine, you followed checklists and you followed plans, right?
Yeah,
And I tell people this. I haven't talked about it yet, but I'm a private pilot. And so you follow probably why we talked about airplanes so much, but you follow checklists, right? And
yeah,
checklists are something for you to go to quickly say, okay, like this is what I need to do. Because in that mass chaos or in that, you hope you've trained to the level of muscle memory. And, people say you fall to the level of training or rise to the level of training, however you want to look at that. But when you have constantly done it over and over again, you more than likely don't need a checklist. But when all of a sudden you add that layer of stress in, people lose memory.
yeah,
And so that checklist, like it is invaluable. Like landing a plane, you pull out a checklist and you scan it. Now, most people have committed it to memory, but I will tell you, because I've had issues upon landing where things didn't go as planned, and I've referred to the checklist, and I'm like, whew, this is like when you add that layer of adrenaline rush in, you need something to go back to. And so it's
oh
having
yeah,
a plan and having a checklist. And when we went through the recall that we had, although we were very established and had everything together, I don't remember anybody saying, "Hey, what's the recall plan? Like,
yeah.
where is it? And are we going to follow it?" Like it was, Bob, what are we doing?
And then you leave the
Like,
production facility and go to some external site and find it there's a binder in someone's office. There you go.
exactly.
There's the recall policy.
That's right. So I think, you bring up great points with regard to training and documentation and muscle memory and like, but that's why you train. And that's why our military is as great as it is
Yeah,
because they train all the
yeah.
time, right?
Oh, I mean, hey, this was back in the 80s and early 90s, and I still
Yeah.
remember we had all these acronyms, like stop, warn others, isolate the other, monitor radiation exposure, all these different.
Yeah.
So we had this acronym SWIMS. And even during the drills, what does SWIMS mean? And you had to
Yep.
rattle it off kind of a thing. And
Yep.
in the middle of a real event, whether it was a fire or flooding or whatever, you're still kind of going through the checklist because that's what you got. And there were incidents where I don't know how, I didn't have time to go grab a binder and
Right.
read
That's
through
right.
the procedure. You had to act instinctively, and I don't want to, instill this idea of being scared about a recall or a ready event, but to stress the point that being in the middle of a recall is not the time to come up with a procedure or to come up with new ideas or to come up with, ways of measuring things or to realize now is the time to train the new employees. It's the worst time to be trying to all of a sudden be quasi proactive when you can't be proactive when you're in the middle of it. You can
No.
only be proactive before.
Right. Right. Well, and not only that, when you start coming up with new things to do, everybody has an opinion, everybody criticizes it. So, when you look at that, it's like in the book, I talk about a restart plan. And, it's like, well, how are we going to go about it? No one ever thought about, okay, the recall is over and the plant's down. We're going to start it back up. But what does that plan look like? And how much should we run? And everybody had a different opinion. Well, let's run 1,000 cases and let's test it for 30 days. And one of like, let's run a complete cycle and we need the product. And everybody had an opinion. But if you look at it from a proactive perspective, if you got all those people in a room and said, okay, let's go through what our restart procedure will look like, and everybody signs off on it from operations to quality to legal to everybody, and if you're aseptic, your process authority, it's like this is how we're going to restart the plan. Then there's no discussion. It's like, okay, we're going to start the plan up. Let's take the page out and let's follow it. Right? There's no anger or chaos or ambiguity or any of that. Right? It's like this is what we're going to do. And so, to drive the message home, anything that people can do proactively, exactly to your point, the better off they're going to be because then it's not even a discussion point. It's just execution.
Sure. And I think economically speaking, you hear this a lot. it's going to cost us a lot to do a mock recall. It's going to cost us a lot to be proactive. It's going to cost us a lot to be
Yep.
preventative. It's going to cost us a lot to be quote unquote recall ready. But I again would flip the conversation and say, well, what's the cost of doing nothing now?
Right.
How
Right.
much will it cost us if we don't do that?
Yep.
How do you put a price tag on reputation? How do you put a price tag on people's lives? How do you put a price tag on a legacy? There's so many different things you could look at that it's like, okay, when you take that into consideration, the cost of being proactive and preventative and recall ready is nothing compared to the cost if you just look at some of the big examples we've talked about:
Right.
Chipotle, Jack in the Box, Boar's Head. I guarantee the economic consequences of these outbreaks, regardless of the cause, are
Hmm.
going to be substantial. And the long term consequences of their names being associated with these events.
Hmm.
Well, we still talk about Jack in the Box, and that was 32 years ago. We still talk about
Right.
Chipotle, and that was what, 16 years ago, or whatever.
Tylenol,
You
right? Right.
We still talk
Tylenol.
about Tylenol, and
Exactly.
that was
Right.
what, 50 years ago, almost 40 years ago, whatever.
That's
Yeah,
right.
40 years ago. So yeah, there's a lot to consider here. And I think that, one of the things that your book does well is the idea of saying, look, let's run you through the idea of being in the midst of a recall because no one wants to be in the midst of a recall,
Right.
right? This is
Right.
not a playbook for when you're in a recall. If anything, this book should be subtitled "How to Prevent Yourself from Being." Is it? Well, it should be subtitled "How to Prevent Yourself from Being in this Situation in the First Place."
Yeah. Yeah.
And even then, you can't do that, but you could try.
You could try. And it goes back to we should be trying, right? And we should be trying to do all the things to stress the systems. And like I just had a meeting with one client. I'm like, stress your system. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, try to like everyone talks about traceability and shipping product and like, oh, this system, you can't ship product with this system if unless it's scanned. I'm like, okay, put a bad label on it. Like, test it. Will it work? And that's where you try to learn and you try to get information and make a better system, right? And it's easy to do when you're not under the gun.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's a limit to how much you do this, but I know that there are companies out there that intentionally will be like, they'll tell one person, okay, you're going to have this problem today, and let's see if people respond to this problem, or the data
Hmm.
will show this. Let's see if if we put this information out in the data, let's see if this can be identified.
Yep.
There's a famous story when I was in the Navy that the guy in charge of the nuclear power program in the Navy way back in the day, he left an actual penny inside of a reactor compartment to see how long it would take for someone to find it.
Hmm.
Now, mind you, we're talking about this was a land-based facility, so it's not like the penny was going to go anywhere or do anything.
Yeah.
But the point being is that it went unnoticed or whatever, undetected for a long time. And the guy was like, how did you not notice there was a penny right there?
Yeah.
And unless you do something like that, you just kind of work on the assumption that, oh, of course they'll find that penny. Of
Sure.
course they'll find that the metal debris. Of course they'll find the out of compliances. Of course they'll find this. Of course, how do you know they'll find this?
Yep.
You can collect all the data in the world, and the data may find things, but will people react to the finding of
Right.
that
Right.
information, right? Unless you test it, how do you know?
Right. Well, and that brings up a great point. When I was with somebody and at the end of my week there, I said, we did a recap and obviously they get the report later, but it's like, how did you find all these things? I said, you have to understand that I have the luxury of not doing a day-to-day job. This is my day-to-day job, right? To find what you won't see because you're doing another job. Like you're doing your day job. And that's where, like in the book, I talk about like when you go through this, it's really a matter of who's your number two to do your job? Because when you get sucked into this, you can't do both. Like I
Yeah,
tried to do that, that didn't work.
yeah,
But same thing as bringing external people in. You do that, so they're hopefully going to find the things that you can't do because you're doing your day job, right? It's like um, that's the truth. And food manufacturers today are doing so much. They have so much on their plates. All the, everything's coming at them. in what you touched on earlier is absolutely correct. Like you have a reduced workforce, you have an untrained workforce, you have turnover, you have all of these things. Your customer demands, if you have a good brand, that's going up. Like it's kind of the perfect storm.
Mhm.
And then you have leadership that may or may not, have the level of experience that's needed. So there's just a lot of stuff going on. And, food manufacturing is not easy. Like it's just not an easy career for anybody. And so the more that we can do and the more that we can help, like I said, for me, if I can prevent one person from getting sick, then that book, like that that did its job. Like
Yeah.
that talk about a legacy. If what I have done can prevent one person from getting sick, that's all that,
I think about that too.
that's all that matters.
You know, uh, I'll never know with my book, which by the way is Food Safety Past, Present, and Predictions. Uh, I don't know who all reads this book. I know some people read the book, and
Yeah,
my goal was that it can't prevent everything, but if I didn't try, then
right. That's
who
right.
knows? And I do want to point out too that your book, In the Midst of a Recall, um, the implications for retailers as well. I mean, especially for those retailers, you start to see more and more, they're called hybrid retailers that they don't just have, meat and produce and dairy and non-perishable, but they've got ready to eat, commercially packaged goods. They've got uh basically like the buffet line kind of thing. You can
Right.
eat right there. They're making
Yeah,
sandwiches, they're making sushi, they're making pizza, you can eat it. There's seating areas. There's so many different levels of complexity going on that a recall has multiple implications on them.
sure.
Uh, Especially, it's not just food on your shelf, it's also food that you took off the shelf and you're now using to make those sandwiches or to put in that
Right.
recipe kind
That's
of
right. That's right.
and then you have third party delivery as well, right? Third party shopping.
Right. That's right.
And so it's such a complex landscape that I really want to acknowledge how your book kind of cuts through, and I find it to be so applicable to, it's not recalls for the dairy industry. It's not
Right.
even recalls just for food manufacturers.
Right. That's
It's kind
right.
of recalls in the bigger sense, because
Yep.
ultimately it doesn't matter what the characteristics of a recall or who's behind a recall is. When you're that consumer that is now faced with the consequences of a
Mhm.
recall that is not properly executed.
Mhm. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I couldn't have summed that up better myself.
There you go. Well, Bob Manning, author of In the Midst of a Recall, I want to thank you very much. This has been a great opportunity to talk with you about not just about your book, but about the implications of some of the various themes and critical points that you raised in your book. And, based on your experience, I'm hoping that those watching these videos will get a great new bit of insight in terms of just how complex and how important it is in terms of being able to survive, whether you're in the midst of a recall or not.
No, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It was a great time. It was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed working with you. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.